The train pulled away with a groaning hiss, kicking dust into the face of the woman left behind. Her gloved hand clutched a worn satchel tighter, knuckles pale under the lace. She didn't cry, at least not yet. Crying would mean she still believed someone might turn back for her. But the station was empty now, save for the wind and the few locals watching from a distance, murmuring with narrowed eyes and upturned lips. Belle-Star Mayfield stood still as the last echo of the engine disappeared into the hills. She was a wide woman, and the fullness of her figure seemed to catch the sunlight unfairly, casting longer shadows than most. Her pale lavender dress strained at the seams, pressed and careful despite the long journey. She had chosen that color because the catalog said it softened round faces. But even the color couldn't hide the fact. She was alone, abandoned at a dusty stop that reeked of tobacco, heat, and disappointment. No one came for her. Not the man who had written 6 eager letters. Not the man who said he didn't mind her size, only her honesty. He wasn't here. Not with flowers, not with a ring. Not with decency. She shifted her trunk beside the bench, the wood groaning under its weight. It was a borrowed piece from her aunt, painted sky blue and now chipped all over. A woman of softer pride might have begged a ride to the nearest inn, but Belle-Star sat, rigid, watching, breathing. 2 young boys tumbled off a nearby freight cart, muddy and wild-eyed, their laughter shrill in the dry air. One chased the other until he nearly tripped over her trunk. He stumbled, paused, then squinted at her. She met his eyes with quiet poise. Her mother always said kindness didn't have to be loud. The boy tilted his head. "You the new schoolteacher?" "No," Belle-Star answered softly. "I was supposed to be someone's bride." The boy blinked, unsure. "He late?" Belle-Star didn't smile. "No, sweetheart. He's not coming." A deeper voice joined them. "Ben, don't pester the lady." The man approaching looked like he carried whole winters in his eyes. Rough coat. Dust-covered boots. A strong, square jaw beneath a mess of dark stubble. He wasn't dressed like a rancher with something to prove. He was just a man trying to stay upright in a world that didn't care if he fell. Boone Carter. He tipped his hat politely. "Ma'am?" "Sir." The boy darted back to the wagon with his brother. Boone lingered. "You need a ride somewhere? I don't suppose you know a Mr. Langley Carver?" Belle-Star's voice tried to sound casual, though her fingers gripped the satchel tighter. Boone shook his head. "No Carvers around here. Not that I'd trust anyone named Langley with much." A tight laugh broke from her lips, bitter and raw. "Well, I trusted him with my future. Foolish me." He lowered his voice. "You come all this way on your own?" Belle-Star nodded once. 3 trains. 1 stagecoach. 2 months of letters. 1 broken promise. He didn't offer hollow words. Just looked at her with a kind of silence that didn't rush to fix things. Belle-Star appreciated that. It was a silence that let pain breathe. "My name's Boone Carter," he said finally. "I got a farm up north, 2 boys, a good horse, and an old roof that needs patching before rain season. Wasn't planning on picking up anything more today than nails and flour. And yet here we are," Belle-Star said. He nodded. "You planning to wait long, miss?" "Mayfield. Belle-Star Mayfield." He smiled. It was small, unsure. "Miss Mayfield." "Belle-Star will do, under the circumstances." "All right, Belle-Star." She met his eyes and found no judgment in them. Just tiredness. And something else, respect perhaps. Or recognition. Like 2 people who had both been slapped by the same cruel wind. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked. "No." "I see." He didn't speak again for a while. The wind picked up, blowing grit across the boards beneath their feet. "My wife passed 2 winters ago," he said eventually. "Influenza. Took her fast. Left me with 2 boys and a mule that bites." Belle-Star folded her hands on her lap, unsure where he was going with this. "I tried to get help. Neighbors, kin. No one sticks around long when the work's back-breaking and there's nothing sweet to come home to." He looked toward the general store. "Boys need a woman's voice in the house. Someone steady. Someone who's not afraid of hard things." Belle-Star stared at him. "I'm not offering pity," Boone said quickly. "You look like a woman who's had enough of that." Her jaw clenched. "I'm offering you a name. A place. A chance to be something more than what that coward left behind." "You're asking me to marry you?" Her voice barely escaped her throat. "Not asking. I'm putting it plain. You don't have to say yes." She blinked. "You don't know me. I seen enough in 5 minutes. You didn't cry when he left you. You sat straight. Held your pride even when your world cracked." Belle-Star looked away. "I wanted to cry." But you didn't. His sons waved from the wagon. Bellstar followed Boone's gaze. You'd be mother to those boys. I don't know how. Neither do I. We'll figure it out. She should have laughed at him. Called him desperate. But something in her heart stirred, some broken place that flickered like kindling meeting a spark. Boone didn't look like a man who offered things lightly. He didn't look like a man who needed saving. Just one willing to share his ruin with another. I'm not thin, she said finally. I'm not blind. I've been told I'm too much. I've been told I'm not enough. They stood in silence again, the world waiting with them. You got a preacher in this town? Bellstar asked, voice low. Boone smiled. He owes me 2 favors and a coat. That should count for something. She stood, smoothing her dress with shaking hands. Then let's get it over with before I come to my senses. He offered her his arm. She hesitated before taking it. Bellstar Mayfield, he said as they walked toward the chapel, I reckon today was meant to break you. But I don't see anything broken standing beside me. Her throat caught. You're either the kindest man I've met or the most foolish. Can't I be both? She laughed then, truly, and the sound startled even herself. Boone led her past gawking townsfolk, past murmurs and judgment. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows behind them, the kind that always come before a storm or a salvation. Bellstar didn't know which waited for her ahead. But at least, she wouldn't be walking into it alone. The wooden chapel smelled of wax and old wood, its windows rattling in the wind as if they, too, were unsure of the vows being spoken inside. Bellstar stood beside Boone with her hands clasped, fingers white at the knuckles. The preacher, a round man with rheumy eyes and a hat 2 sizes too large, rattled off the words as though performing a blessing on a stubborn horse, and not 2 strangers stitching their lives together with raw thread and fast knots. Boone's boys stood nearby, one clutching a fistful of prairie daisies, the other chewing on his thumb with suspicious eyes. They didn't quite understand what was happening, only that their father had spoken in the same tone he used when mending fences in a storm, firm and final. Bellstar repeated the vows in a voice that wavered only once. When the preacher said, "Do you take this man?" she hesitated. Just a breath. But Boone didn't flinch. He only looked at her with eyes that didn't judge, didn't pity, just waited. That stillness steadied her. And she said, "I do," not as a surrender but as a choice. The kiss that followed was brief, barely a brush, but it sealed something neither of them could name. The preacher nodded and mumbled, "That'll do," before stepping away with a rustle of his robes. Outside, Bellstar squinted against the sun. The station still loomed behind them, a reminder of how quickly life could change in the blink of a train whistle. Boone offered her his hand again and she took it, noticing the calluses, honest hands rough from work, not from cruelty. They climbed into the wagon. Boone's eldest helped her settle in, surprisingly gentle for a boy raised in dirt and silence. Bellstar felt the weight of stares from behind her as they rolled out of town, folk watching, judging, whispering words like desperate and foolish. She kept her gaze ahead. The road north twisted through dry grasslands and clusters of birch, the wind curling through yellowing leaves. Boone didn't speak for a long while. The boys napped against each other in the back, and Bellstar watched the sky change from blue to gold. "You still breathing over there?" Boone asked after some time. "I think so. You did good back there." "I didn't faint, if that's what you mean." He chuckled. "That too." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. Just open space waiting to be filled. Boone let the reins slacken slightly, guiding the mules up a ridge where the land opened wide into endless prairie. Bellstar shifted. "You said you lost your wife?" 2 winters passed. Flu came through like fire. Took half the town. Took her fast. "I'm sorry." She was kind. Never raised her voice even when I deserved it. He glanced at her. "You don't have to be her, Bellstar. I didn't marry you to fill a hole." "Why did you marry me?" He considered that. "Because I needed someone strong enough to carry more than just water buckets. Someone who wouldn't wilt the first time the world turned mean." "You think I'm strong?" "I think you've been standing on cracked ground so long, you don't realize it's you holding the roof up." Bellstar didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't. But her eyes stung in the wind and not from dust. The sun dipped lower, and Boone pointed toward a hill where a crooked fence cut across a slope. "That's home." The cabin wasn't much, weather-beaten, with a roof patched in too many colors of wood and a porch that sagged slightly to the right. Chickens scattered as they pulled in, and a tired dog barked twice before recognizing the wagon. Inside it smelled of pine soap, smoke and bread gone slightly stale. Bellstar's trunk was placed by the wall. A rocker creaked in the corner. She stepped inside slowly, feeling like an intruder in a life that wasn't hers. Boone showed her where the water was kept, the kettle, the matches, the hooks on the wall for her coat. His movements were natural, unhurried. He was a man used to sharing space with ghosts. That night, they ate beans and cornbread by firelight. Boone's boys, Emmett and Samuel, sat close to the hearth. Belle-Star watched them from across the table, unsure of her place. When she tried to take their plates to wash, Samuel flinched. "I won't hurt you," she said softly. Boone glanced up. "They ain't used to kindness yet. Give them time. I'm not their mother." "No. But they'll learn what your voice means soon enough." Later, Boone offered her the bed. "I'll take the chair," he said, already grabbing a blanket. "We just got married," she said, cautious. "Doesn't mean I get to demand more than you're ready to give." Belle-Star nodded. That was the first time her heart truly relaxed. The days that followed were raw and real. Belle-Star learned to gather eggs from hens that pecked like old maids. She chopped vegetables, mended shirts, and swept the floor while Samuel trailed her, saying nothing. At night, she read from her old prayer book aloud, and Boone listened with his eyes closed, not praying, just present. One morning, while hanging clothes on the line, she heard laughter from the barn. Emmett was grinning, mud on his cheeks, as Belle-Star tried to catch a runaway goat. Boone stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with a lopsided smile. "She likes you," Emmett said, pointing at the goat. "I must smell like her cousin," Belle-Star huffed, catching her breath. Boone approached. "You're doing better than most would. They ain't easy animals." "Neither am I." Boone looked at her, really looked. "Good." That night, as the wind howled through the chinks in the wall, Belle-Star found herself awake while the rest slept. She walked onto the porch in her shawl and stared up at the stars. The land was quiet, holding its breath. Boone joined her, boots light against the boards. "You miss the city?" he asked. "I miss knowing what comes next." He nodded. "Out here we just keep moving. One fence post at a time." Belle-Star hesitated. "I keep thinking he might show up, the man who left me at the station. What if he does?" Boone leaned on the rail. "Then he'll see what he lost. And I'll make sure he doesn't forget it." Belle-Star looked at him. "You don't even know what I'm worth." Boone's voice was steady. "No. But I see how your hands never stop. How the boys started sleeping through the night again. How my house don't feel hollow anymore." Her throat tightened. She blinked quickly, then laughed softly. "That's a lot for a fat woman with a broken trunk." He stepped closer. "It's not the weight that mattered. It was the way you carried it." Their eyes locked. For a moment, the air shifted between them, charged, uncertain. "I'm not asking you to fall in love with me," Boone said, voice low. "But I won't stand by if someone tries to take what's mine." Belle-Star didn't reply. But she leaned against the railing beside him, shoulder to shoulder, watching the stars until the cold chased them back inside. And deep down, in a place she didn't quite understand yet, Belle-Star knew. Something in her had begun to change. Not because she was finally chosen, but because, for the first time, she had chosen back. The frost came early that year. Belle-Star woke one morning to find the windows kissed with ice, delicate crystals blooming in the corners like lacework. She wrapped herself in her shawl and moved to the stove, feeding it wood and coaxing the flames to life. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, fierce and biting. Boone was already up, splitting logs behind the barn with that quiet intensity she'd grown to recognize. The boys were still tangled in their quilts, breath fogging softly above their mouths. Belle-Star poured hot water into the tin basin and washed her face. As she caught her reflection in the rippling surface, she noticed something strange. She looked different. Not thinner. Not softer. But grounded. Like the land had begun to shape her into something rooted. Later that morning, Boone returned with a letter in his hand, creased and mud-spotted. He held it out like it might burn. Belle-Star dried her hands on her apron before taking it. The handwriting was sharp and arrogant. To Belle-Star Mayfield, "I was told you went through with the marriage. That you dared to take another man's place while wearing the title that should have been mine. You'll regret that. I'm coming." The signature, though slashed with haste, was unmistakable. Langley Carver. The name made her stomach twist. She hadn't heard from him since the day she'd stepped off that train and found only silence. Now, suddenly he remembered she existed? Belle-Star read it again. Her lips pressed into a hard line. She folded the letter slowly and precisely, then handed it back to Boone. "Well," she said, voice steady, "the rat wants his cheese." Boone didn't smile. "He knows where we are. He'll come with fists or lawyers. He'll find me with a rifle. Boone sat down at the table, rubbing the edge of the letter with his thumb. If he tries to lay claim, we'll have to be ready. He doesn't have a claim. Her voice was sharp now. He left me to rot. That letter is the sound of a man realizing someone else found value in what he threw away. Boone nodded. Still, I'd rather he didn't show up here thinking this land's full of sheep. Then we show him the wolves. 4 days after, Boone worked like a man bracing for a flood. He fixed the fencing, sharpened every blade, oiled his rifle until it gleamed. Bellstar trained herself too, not with weapons but with will. She made sure the boys knew how to keep quiet if danger came. She kept her eyes on the horizon when hanging laundry, her ears tuned to hoofbeats. The tension seeped into everything, even the air they breathed. Bellstar found herself flinching at every knock, every distant shout from the road. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in reds and purples, Boone handed her a revolver. It was small, nestled into her palm like a secret. "You don't have to fire it," he said. "Just knowing it's there might be enough." Bellstar stared at it. "I've never held a gun before." "Well, now you have." She nodded. "I don't want to shoot anyone." "Neither do I. But I'll do it," she said, her voice low, "if he thinks he can take me back like property." Boone's eyes met hers. "He won't get close enough to try." The storm broke the next afternoon. A cloud of dust rose in the distance, long before the sound of hooves reached the house. Bellstar was tending to the stew pot when Boone stiffened at the window. "Riders," he muttered. He stepped outside with his rifle slung across his back. Bellstar followed, revolver tucked under her apron. Emmett and Samuel watched from the barn loft, instructed to stay silent and still. 3 men rode toward the house. Langley Carver was at the front, sitting tall in his saddle like a man auditioning for a portrait. His black coat flared in the wind. His face, though still sharp and clean-shaven, had the pale smugness of someone who'd never labored a day in his life. The other 2 were thicker, hired fists without names. Boone stood at the fence. "You've got about 10 seconds to say your piece," he called. Langley dismounted slowly, adjusting his gloves. "You must be the man who picked up my leftovers." Bellstar's fingers twitched. Boone didn't rise to the insult. "You've got no business here." "I've got all the business in the world," Langley replied, stepping forward. "That woman was promised to me. She arrived with the intent to wed. I paid for the passage. That makes her mine." Bellstar stepped up beside Boone, chin high. "You're not owed anything but the shame you left behind." Langley's smile was tight. "You think that ring means anything? There was no license. No papers filed. She's still legally free." "Then we'll file the damn papers," Boone said coldly. Langley's gaze flicked to Bellstar. "You really think you belong here? Out in the dirt, with these half-wild children and a man who reeks of cowhide? You were meant for better." Bellstar laughed. It startled even herself. "I was meant for freedom. And I found it the day you didn't show up." Langley's face twisted. Boone shifted his stance. "You want to test the rest of this conversation with a bullet? Or are you smart enough to leave with your pride mostly intact?" One of Langley's men reached for his gun. Bellstar raised hers first. The click of her hammer pulling back rang sharp in the air. Langley's man froze. "I may not know how to aim yet," Bellstar said, her voice clear, "but at this range I don't have to." Boone moved closer to her, his presence a shield. "You done?" he asked Langley. Langley's nostrils flared. But his men were hesitating. The show of defiance had stolen whatever dominance he'd planned to wield. "I'll be back," he hissed. "With law. With men. You won't be able to hide behind your barn and your woman forever." "You can bring a whole army," Bellstar said, lowering her gun. "But you'll still find me standing." Langley didn't reply. He turned sharply and mounted. His men followed, slower, wary now. The dust trailed behind them like shame. Boone watched until they disappeared. Bellstar's hands shook as she holstered the revolver. He looked at her. "You all right?" "No. But you're still standing." "I am." He reached out, brushing his fingers along her sleeve. "You didn't just stand, Bellstar. You held the line." She laughed again, this time softer. "I'll need practice. My aim was terrible. Next time we'll shoot bottles." That night, they ate in silence, not from fear, but from the kind of exhaustion that comes after reclaiming something stolen. The boys leaned against Bellstar's sides as she read from her prayer book again. Boone watched her, and for the first time since the wedding, he didn't see a woman abandoned. He saw the one who stayed, the one who stood, and who, despite everything, was starting to believe she deserved to. Snow fell in soft, silent drifts over the Carter homestead. It blanketed the barn roof, softened the jagged fence posts, and turned the ragged prairie into something almost peaceful. The world was hushed beneath its weight as though holding its breath. Belle-Star stood at the kitchen window with a mug of weak coffee between her hands, watching Boone shovel a path through the powder. He moved slow this morning, his shoulders still stiff from the last storm, but his movements were steady, sure. Inside, the boys were sprawled out by the hearth, drawing in the soot on the stone with sticks. Samuel had sketched something that vaguely resembled their goat. Belle-Star smiled faintly. There were days she still struggled to believe all this was hers. Not the land, not the house, but the quiet. The place where she no longer had to defend her right to be loved. The place where the air no longer buzzed with shame. She ran a hand over the growing pile of books on the side table. A traveling bookseller had come through the town a week prior, and Belle-Star had bartered for primers and a hymnal. Now, 3 neighboring children came by every Sunday, tracking in snow and grins, eager to learn their letters from the woman who had once been left on a bench like luggage. Boone stepped inside, stamping off snow. He hung up his coat and came to kiss her cheek without a word. He always kissed her now, every morning, habit perhaps, but it never felt routine. His lips lingered. He still saw her every day like it was the first. The wind shifted, whistling sharp through the eaves. Belle-Star's fingers tightened around her mug. Boone noticed. "You all right?" She nodded. "Just that time of year, I suppose." He knew what she meant. It had been nearly a year since the day she arrived. Since the train, the letter, the rushed vows in a crooked chapel. A year since she had been claimed by a stranger and rebuilt herself inside his home. They sat together in the afternoon, rocking gently on the porch. The boys raced up and down the snow-tracked path, tossing handfuls at each other with wild shouts. Boone's arm slid behind Belle-Star's back. She leaned into it, breathing in the scent of pine and leather. Then came the rider. A single figure on a dark horse. No cloud of dust. No companions. Just one man, black against the white. Boone stood first. "Inside," he said calmly, eyes never leaving the silhouette. Belle-Star didn't argue. She herded the boys into the cabin and latched the door, but she didn't stay behind it. She watched through the window as Boone stepped off the porch with his rifle tucked low against his leg. The man dismounted with care. His coat flared as he moved. It was Langley. His hat brim was crusted with frost. His cheeks red from the wind, but his eyes were still cold. "I came alone," he called. "I figured you'd prefer that." Boone said nothing. Langley took a step forward, slow. "I thought I'd be the one who made her into something." "You thought wrong." Langley gave a small, bitter laugh. "And yet you did it. You married her. Built something out here." Boone remained still. Langley glanced toward the house. "She's stronger than I remembered. When I saw her sitting at that station, I thought she'd give up. Find a train back east. Fade." "She grew roots instead," Boone replied. Langley's eyes flicked back. "And she's got you to thank for that?" "She owes me nothing." There was a silence between them, heavy with words unsaid. Langley sighed. "I didn't come to take her. I know that ship sailed. I just wanted to see what kind of man replaced me." "You weren't replaced," Boone said. "You were erased." Langley bristled, but the fight had gone out of him. "You'll leave now," Boone said. "And not just from this land. From her story." "I already did," Langley said, voice low. Belle-Star opened the door then. Her shawl whipped in the wind, but she stood tall. "If you're here to apologize, save your breath." Langley looked at her. For the first time the mask cracked. "I'm not sorry for leaving," he said. "But I'm sorry I never saw what was in front of me." Belle-Star's gaze didn't soften. "I'm not." He nodded, turned, and climbed back onto his horse. No dramatic exit. Just the crunch of hooves over frozen ground. Boone returned to the porch, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Belle-Star reached for his hand. "You didn't have to come out," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. "I wanted him to see." Boone looked at her. "See what?" "That I didn't disappear. That I grew. That I became." He nodded slowly. "You did." That night, the fire burned long into the quiet hours. Emmett and Samuel fell asleep against Belle-Star's sides as Boone whittled a small toy horse near the hearth. Belle-Star looked down at the boys, both safe and warm, and knew there was no going back. Not for any of them. Boone set the carving aside and came to sit beside her. They didn't speak for a long while. The wind howled outside, but inside there was only the creak of the rocker and the soft, rhythmic breaths of children. "I love you," Boone said quietly, without ceremony. Belle-Star turned to him. "You do?" He nodded. I didn't know it until I thought about what I'd do if he tried to take you. Not fight. Not shoot. Just live in a world without you in it. And that made me feel hollow. She smiled. I was afraid to say it first. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Bellstar reached up, touched his face. I love you too. More than I ever thought I could love anyone. Boone kissed her, not briefly this time. Not polite. A kiss that said he knew every scar she carried, every shame once branded into her skin, and none of it mattered. She was not a fat woman he took in out of kindness. She was not a charity. She was not a placeholder. She was his wife, his partner, the mother of his boys, and the beating heart of their home. Outside the snow deepened. The land slept. But inside the Carter cabin, beneath a patched roof and beside a flickering fire, love had rooted itself deep into the frozen ground, unmoving, unashamed, and here to stay. The train shrieked as it pulled into Dust Hollow, coughing plumes of white steam into the morning frost. Pearl Hart Whitmore stepped down from the final car, her boots crunching on the half-frozen mud. The hem of her lilac dress fluttered against her ankles, stained from soot and 1,000 miles of hope. She stood straighter than she felt, trunk by her feet, gloved hands tightening around a parcel of letters she'd read 100 times. Her left eye drifted inward as it always had, catching more judgment than dust. She blinked it away. Men leaned against posts, spitting tobacco and sizing her up like cattle. Women whispered behind handkerchiefs. Children pointed. No one came forward. She had imagined him, William Granger, would be tall, perhaps grizzled from ranch life, but with kind eyes. He'd written so sweetly. Called her Sunrise in script. Said he wanted a woman with roots, not ribbons. That he didn't care for beauty. She had hoped. A slim man stepped out from the crowd, broad-brimmed hat casting a sharp shadow over his brow. You Pearl Hart Whitmore? He asked flatly. She nodded. Yes, sir. And you must be. I'm William Granger. He looked her over, lips tightening. Pearl Hart instinctively smoothed her bodice, heart hammering like a runaway horse. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Your letters. He interrupted. You didn't mention your eye. The words hit harder than a slap. Pearl Hart faltered. I didn't think it mattered. It matters, he said loud enough for the onlookers to hear. I run a ranch, Miss Whitmore, not a circus. I can't have folks thinking I'm so desperate I'd marry a woman who can't look a man straight. Someone snorted behind him. A woman sked. Pearl Hart opened her mouth, then shut it. Her cheeks burned, but her voice stayed even. You wrote me. You said you wanted someone with a mind and a soul. I wrote a lot of things. He shrugged. Didn't think you'd actually come all the way out here. She stood there, surrounded by strangers and stares, the weight of the West pressing down on her spine. She could hear the train behind her, the hiss of steam winding down like a dying breath. I came for a new life, she whispered. Granger tipped his hat to her, mocking. Then best start walking toward it. 'Cause it ain't with me. He turned on his heel and strode back into the saloon, door swinging shut behind him with a bang. No one stopped him. The silence was louder than gunfire. Sheriff Donovan approached, brushing snow from his coat. He didn't meet her eye, either one. Town's got no room for stray brides, Mississippi. No boarding house, and winter's coming hard. You'll want to move on before sundown. And go where? She asked, voice trembling. He offered a half-hearted shrug. Ain't my concern. With that he walked away. Pearl Hart looked around. No friendly faces. No welcome. Her trunk seemed heavier than it had on the train. She picked it up by the handle and started walking. Each step felt like glass underfoot. The snow began to fall, slow, lazy flakes drifting down as if even the sky couldn't be bothered to hurry. Her boots sank in mud. Her breath frosted. She walked until the buildings thinned and the wind picked up, whipping her shawl sideways. She found a broken wagon near the edge of town and sat beneath it. Her fingers were numb. Her pride was worse. She pulled out the letter, the first one he wrote. Ink faded, paper creased soft. She held it up to the dimming light and tore it slowly in half. Twice. Then into tiny pieces that fluttered into the wind like dead moths. Should have known, she muttered, hugging her coat tighter. Should have stayed where folks didn't look at me like I was cursed. She didn't cry. Not yet. The cold wouldn't allow it. Tears would freeze on her lashes. The sun dipped low behind the pines, casting long shadows over the field. Coyotes howled in the far hills. She could hear rustling in the brush. A twig snapped nearby. She reached for the trunk's lid, where she'd hidden her small revolver, fingers stiff. Another snap. A shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. Then, boots crunching snow. She turned sharply. A man stepped into the clearing, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a worn coat and a wide black hat dusted with frost. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, not drawn. He paused when he saw her, didn't flinch, didn't sneer. Pearl Hart stood, straightening as much as she could, jaw set. "I ain't got nothing worth stealing." The man tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Didn't come to steal. You look half dead." "Just fine, thanks," she bit back. He stepped closer. In the firelight of the sunset, his face came into view, weathered, marked by time and solitude, not unkind. "Suit yourself," he said gruffly. "But there's a fire 2 hills over and stew on it. You can freeze here or warm up. Your call." She eyed him, unsure. He didn't wait for her answer, just turned and started walking back toward the trees. Pearl Hart looked down at her torn letters, then at the stars just beginning to shimmer in the sky. She gathered her trunk, straightened her shoulders, and followed the man into the darkness. Behind her, Dust Hollow faded into silence. And ahead, whatever came next. The trail narrowed to a winding, ice-ribbed path flanked by black pines. Pearl Hart followed the stranger in silence, her trunk bumping against her leg with each step. He hadn't looked back once since he'd offered the fire, or maybe it wasn't an offer but a test. She hadn't decided yet. Snow whispered across the forest floor, thin and sharp like breath drawn through clenched teeth. Dusk dimmed to true dark by the time they reached the cabin. It stood hunkered into the hillside like it was trying to disappear, roof sagging under a thick quilt of snow, a single plume of smoke curling from the crooked chimney. The man pushed open the door without a word and stepped aside to let her in. Pearl Hart hesitated, then crossed the threshold. The cabin was small but warm. A cast-iron stove glowed in one corner, stew bubbling low. The scent of sage, onion, and old tobacco hung in the air. A bearskin rug covered most of the floor. A rifle rack, a stack of firewood, a battered chair near the hearth. That was it. No lace curtains, no carved Bible verses, no woman's touch. He closed the door behind her and stomped snow off his boots. "You can dry your things there." He gestured to a peg near the stove. "Stew's near done. You eat." She nodded, throat too tight to speak. He ladled the stew into 2 tin bowls and handed her one. She sat on the floor near the stove, warming her hands first, then holding the bowl like something sacred. He sat across from her, his back to the wall, eyes unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. They ate in silence, the only sound the occasional crackle from the stove and the muted wind howling outside. When she finally spoke, it came out soft. "Thank you for not walking away." The man didn't answer right away. He set his bowl down beside him and stretched his legs toward the fire. "Name's Bo. Bo McAllister. Pearl Hart Whitmore." He nodded once like that settled something. The silence returned, but it wasn't the cruel kind from Dust Hollow. This one sat like a dog between them, watchful, quiet, waiting. "Folks don't talk much out here," he said at last. "They listen more." Pearl Hart stared into the stew. "I've had enough of folks talking. Too many mouths saying things that burn." He didn't pry. Just nodded again and leaned his head back, eyes closing. She watched him in the firelight, how the shadows carved deeper lines into his face, how one side of his mouth bore an old scar. She didn't ask where it came from. Didn't ask why he lived alone or how long it had been since he saw a town. She just listened to the fire and let the warmth inch back into her bones. The next morning came harsh and bright. Snow had crusted the windows, and the forest outside looked like a painting frozen mid-thought. Pearl Hart awoke to the smell of coffee and the scrape of a blade against wood. Bo was carving something at the table, long fingers working with quiet patience. She stood, smoothing her dress, and walked over. "Coffee?" he asked without looking up. She nodded, then added, "Please?" He poured her a cup from a battered tin pot. It was bitter, strong, and the most comforting thing she'd tasted in years. "You staying long?" he asked, eyes still on the wood. Pearl Hart set her cup down. "Don't rightly know. Sheriff said I had till sundown. But I don't think Dust Hollow will miss me." He looked up then. Just a flicker. "Town's poison. Been that way a long while. Ain't you they rejected? It's anything don't fit neat into their picture." She smiled bitterly. "I've never fit anywhere. Not with this." She tapped her left eye lightly. "People think if your eyes don't match, your mind must wander too." Bo grunted. "People think a lot of dumb things." They passed the day in quiet labor. Pearl Hart washed dishes, swept out the corners. Bo repaired a trap, muttering when the spring snapped. When evening came, they shared another stew, and for the first time Pearl Hart laughed, really laughed, when Bo cursed the burnt bottom of the pot. The sound startled them both. "You should do that more," he said, half smiling. "You got a laugh that cuts through walls." Pearl Hart looked down, cheeks warm. "Haven't had much reason." That night, snow fell again. He let her take the bed and she didn't argue. As she lay beneath the heavy quilts, she stared at the low ceiling and listened to him moving quietly outside, chopping wood by moonlight. She felt a strange ache, not from sadness, not from shame, but something else. A kind of longing she hadn't known she'd carried. By the 5th day, the silence between them had softened. She knew now that Beau had once served in the Union Army, that he hated banks, and that he could whittle anything if you gave him time. He knew she liked her coffee black, that she had once dreamed of owning a bookstore, and that she hummed when she cooked. Old him she thought she'd forgotten. One morning he returned from setting traps, rifle slung across his back and a hair hanging from his belt. She met him at the door, hands on hips. "You gonna teach me how to shoot, or just keep feeding me meat I didn't earn?" He chuckled, deep and low. "You ever even held a rifle?" "I'm a schoolteacher. I've held far worse." Out back in a clearing by the pines, he taught her the stance. How to breathe. How not to jerk the trigger. Her first shot missed wide. Second one clipped the edge. Third, nailed it. He nodded with respect. "Well, might be I should watch my step." She smiled. Might be. That night, she sat by the fire, toying with a locket she hadn't worn since Kansas. Inside was a faded picture of her parents and a scrap of a hymn. She held it out to Beau without a word. He looked at it, then at her. "You miss him?" "Every day. But I think they'd have liked it here. The quiet. The truth of things." Beau leaned forward. "You don't have to stay quiet forever, Pearl Hart." She met his eyes. "I don't want to run any more." They sat in silence again. But this time it was the kind that meant something had shifted. Late that night, something snapped outside. Not wood. Not ice. A branch. Beau was up in an instant, rifle in hand. He gestured for her to stay low. She crouched near the stove, blood pounding in her ears. He opened the door slowly, stepped out. Moonlight lit the clearing. Nothing moved. Then, a shadow darted between trees. Pearl Hart peeked through the window. Men. 3 of them. One with a wide-brimmed hat. Another with a lantern. She didn't wait for instruction. She grabbed the second rifle from the rack and crouched by the back window. A voice rang out from the trees. "Beau McAllister. Come out now and make this easy." Beau stepped onto the porch. "Ain't nothing easy about men who sneak through snow like rats. You're wanted, McAllister. You can come quiet or we'll take you cold." Pearl Hart's breath hitched. He glanced back once. "Stay down," he mouthed. But she didn't. She kept her hands on the rifle, heart slamming in her chest. They hadn't come for her. They came for him. And she'd be damned if she let them take him alone. The first shot cracked through the air. Beau dropped behind the barrel as a bullet splintered the porch rail. Pearl Hart didn't scream. She fired once, clean, driving one man back into the trees. Beau looked at her, surprised. She gave him a nod. "I told you, I'm tired of running." The standoff had begun. And this cabin of silence had just become a battlefield. The cabin was still smoking when morning bled across the treetops. Burnt pine and black powder lingered in the air like ghosts refusing to leave. Pearl Hart crouched beside the window, hands trembling around the stock of the rifle. Beau stood in the doorway, silhouette carved in ash and rising sun. 3 men had come. Only one rode off. The others were buried behind the shed, their guns stripped, boots removed. Pearl Hart hadn't asked their names. Neither had Beau. The forest had already started to swallow their graves. Beau moved like a man whose bones remembered war, quiet, methodical. He didn't speak much that day, not even when Pearl Hart tried. She boiled water. Cleaned his shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. The blood had dried into the fabric of his coat. She cut it free with a knife, her fingers working gently, even as the air between them pulsed with things unspoken. "You should have stayed down," he said finally. "You should have told me you were wanted." They locked eyes. His were storm gray, rimmed in pain. Hers mismatched, steady. "I didn't kill those men in Missouri," he muttered. "But that don't matter. The posters don't say, innocent. They say reward. And folks get hungry when there's money on the line." Pearl Hart nodded slowly. "What did you do?" He looked toward the trees. "Railroad men tried to hang a Navajo boy outside a saloon in Ogallala. Said he stole beef. I stepped in. Knocked one of 'em cold. Another hit his head on the trough. Didn't get up." She didn't flinch. "So you ran." Beau's jaw flexed. "Couldn't stay. Law don't favor brown skin or the ones who protect it." The fire cracked softly. Outside, a crow called once and flew on. "I believe you," she said. His eyes flicked back to her. "Why?" "Because I've seen the kind of men who call themselves decent, and what they do when no one's looking straight at them." Bo exhaled, a sound closer to relief than anything else. "I figured you'd leave. Now that you know." Pearl Hart rose to her feet, eyes never leaving his. "You ever seen what it's like to be rejected just for the way your face moves? For something you were born with? I've been left behind by folks who never asked my name. I'm not leaving someone who gave me a fire and half a bowl of stew when the rest of the world turned cold." For the first time, something in him softened. A quiet breaking. They shared a meal that night, close to the fire. He told her about the high country, how it turned gold in the spring, how the snow melted off the ridges first. She spoke of the schoolhouse she used to teach in, how the children would mimic her crossed eye when they thought she wasn't looking. But the humor in her voice surprised them both. "Little fools," she chuckled. "I used to go home and practice staring into one eye. Can't say I ever got the hang of it." Bo laughed, not a bark but a low, full laugh. "You ain't the only one been practiced at not looking where folks want." For the first time, Pearl Hart felt herself loosening, unfolding like a page uncreased. The world had not changed, but something inside her had. She began to help more around the cabin. Rewove one of his torn shirts. Fixed the door hinge. She even patched a hole in the roof, climbing up with a hammer and a roll of tattered canvas. Bo stood below, hands on hips. "You always fix things that don't belong to you?" he called. She grinned down at him. "Just the ones worth saving." It was the closest they came to admitting what had bloomed between them. One evening, Bo returned from the ridge with a rabbit and a bundle of wild sage. Pearl Hart was kneading dough with her sleeves rolled up, apron dusted in flour. She turned when he entered, then paused. He was watching her, not in that guarded, wary way most men did, but fully. Like her presence had become a part of the room he counted on. "What?" she asked, a little breathless. Bo walked forward, slow, steady. "You been making this place warmer than it ever was." Her hands fell still. "I keep thinking," he said, voice low, "you were meant for someplace better than a cabin full of traps and wanted posters." "And I keep thinking," she replied, stepping toward him, "that I've never been seen better than I am right here." They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the space between them thinned into something fragile and trembling, like the surface of a stream right before it freezes. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud. Just 3 solid raps. Bo's body tensed. Pearl Hart froze, heart in her throat. The door creaked open. There he stood, William Granger. Clean coat. Gloves too fine for winter. Behind him, 2 men with rifles and hard eyes. "Well now," Granger drawled, stepping inside like he owned the place. "Ain't this something?" Pearl Hart's breath caught in her chest. Bo's hand hovered near his sidearm, but Granger raised both palms. "Easy now. I came to talk." "No one sent for you," Pearl Hart said sharply. "I came for what's mine." He gestured to her. "My bride." She stepped back. "I was never yours." "You were. I paid for your train fare. That means something." "It means I paid for it with my pride," she hissed. "And you tore it up in front of a crowd." Granger's gaze slid to Bo. "You think this man can keep you safe? He's got the law gunning for him from 5 counties. You think this ends well?" Bo didn't move. His voice when it came was calm. "You're not taking her anywhere." Granger smiled thinly. "That's so." "I'm not a parcel to claim," Pearl Hart said. "You didn't want me when I was alone in the snow. You only came now because you heard I was wanted by someone else. You think this outlaw loves you?" Granger barked. "You think he's gonna build you a home?" "No," Pearl Hart said. "I think he already did." Granger's face twisted. "You think this town will ever accept you walking beside a criminal? A cross-eyed girl and a runaway gun hand ain't exactly Sunday school material." Pearl Hart's voice turned to steel. "Then we won't walk through towns. We'll walk through mountains. Forests, places where the earth don't care how eyes wander or who the law marks for dead." Granger's hand drifted to his belt. Bo stepped forward. But Pearl Hart was faster. She slammed the butt of a skillet onto the table with a crash. "Don't you dare. Not here. Not in this place." For a moment, no one moved. Granger studied her. Then spat on the floor. "You'll regret this. Both of you." He turned, stormed out, and vanished into the dusk. The other men followed. The door swung shut behind them. Bo exhaled. "He'll be back." "I know." Pearl Hart reached out, gently touched his hand. "So we don't wait. We ride first." Bo looked at her, gaze unreadable. You sure? I've been unsure all my life, she whispered. But not now. Not with you. Outside the wind picked up. The pines swayed. And somewhere on the horizon, Dust Hollow was stirring. Snow swirled around them as they approached Dust Hollow, the town rising from the frostbitten plain like a memory she never meant to revisit. Pearl Hart rode ahead, her lilac dress hidden beneath a riding cloak of patched wool, her chin lifted high. Beside her, Bo sat rigid in the saddle, his rifle secured but within easy reach, his gaze never leaving the street ahead. They came not as fugitives but as something fiercer, two people no longer asking for permission to exist. The streets of Dust Hollow hadn't changed. Same warped porches, same tilted signs. But now eyes peeked from curtained windows, and whispers crawled ahead of them like vipers. The sheriff was the first to greet them, stepping out of his office with his hand already on his hip. "McAllister," he said coolly. "Didn't expect you to stroll back into the lion's mouth." "I didn't come to hide," Bo replied. "And I didn't come to ask," Pearl Hart added. "We're not here for forgiveness. We're here for the truth." The sheriff's eyes flicked toward her. "Town remembers what happened last time. You were told to leave." "I did. You all made sure of it," she said. "But I'm not the same woman who stepped off that train. And he's not the outlaw you painted him to be." Voices gathered, curious townsfolk creeping from corners, drawn to the spectacle. Murmurs rippled, "That's her. The bride that got tossed. Ain't she the cross-eyed one? That fella's wanted." The saloon doors burst open. William Granger strode into the street like he owned the dust beneath his boots. A smug grin carved his face. He wore a new coat, boots too shiny for real work, and a badge of self-importance in his eyes. "Well, well," he sneered. "Look who came crawling back." Pearl Hart didn't flinch. "I came to face you. To show them what you are." Granger barked a laugh. "And what am I?" "A liar. A coward. A man so ashamed of himself he blamed me for the way I look. Then tried to take me back when he heard someone else saw what he never did." He stepped forward, his voice rising for the crowd. "You all know me. You know I wouldn't turn down a woman without cause. Look at her. I's going different ways. Witchy. And him, McAllister's a known criminal. There's posters in 3 counties. You really think this is about love?" The town stood still. Faces in windows. Boots shifting in dirt. No one stepped forward. Not yet. Then a voice spoke, quiet but firm. "She's right." All turned. From the edge of the crowd stepped a man wrapped in a dark wool blanket, silver hair tied back. His face was lined with age and sun, but his eyes burned bright. "I was there," he said. "The day the boy was almost lynched in Ogallala. I saw McAllister pull him down. I saw him try to walk away. It was one of the railroad men that died, not by his hand but by their own rage." Bo's breath caught. Pearl Hart reached for his hand and squeezed. "Who are you?" the sheriff asked. "I am the boy's uncle. And I've been waiting a long time to speak that truth." A hush fell like snow. Pearl Hart stepped forward, her voice steady. "You all watched me walk through this town with my head bowed. Because of an eye that doesn't follow orders. You judged me, whispered, cast me out. But I never cursed you. I just wanted a place to belong. And now I've found someone who sees me whole." She looked around, making eye contact with as many as she could. Some turned away, others held her gaze. "You don't have to like me. You don't have to understand. But you will not lie about me. Or him." Granger's smile had vanished. His hand drifted low. Bo saw it. "Don't," he warned. But Granger's pride outweighed reason. He drew. The shot rang out before his pistol cleared the holster. Bo had moved faster, one clean shot to the shoulder. Granger dropped like a felled tree, his weapon clattering to the street. The crowd scattered with a gasp. Pearl Hart didn't move, didn't blink. The sheriff stepped forward slowly. He looked from the wounded man on the ground to the steady-eyed couple before him. "I reckon that was self-defense," he said. Then added louder, "And I reckon this town's got some apologizing to do." He turned to the crowd. "Dust Hollow made a mistake. And I won't be part of making another one." The town shifted. Heads nodded. Someone clapped. Then another. Slowly the cold hate thawed into uneasy acceptance. Not approval, not yet, but the kind of silence that hinted at change. Granger was carried away, groaning, coat bloodied. No one followed him. Later, in the warm light of the general store, Pearl Hart stood beside Bo as they signed their names into the marriage register. The same clerk who once looked through her like glass now handed her the pen with both hands, eyes soft. She wrote her name slowly, proudly. Outside, snow melted beneath the rising sun. They rode out that evening just as the sky turned orange behind the hills. Pearl Hart's dress caught the wind like a banner. Bo rode beside her, quiet, steady. She looked ahead, eyes misaligned but unafraid. Behind them lay a town they no longer feared. Ahead, a future they'd carved from winter and fire. And as they disappeared into the open country, the wind carried her voice. I wasn't born broken. Just unseen. Not anymore. Snow drifted like ash through the gray sky as the train hissed to a halt in the middle of a half-built town called Stillwater. The platform was crooked and wind-bitten, more splinters than boards. Eleanor Walker stepped down in boots that had seen better years, her gloved hand clutching a valise wrapped in worn leather. She wore a modest wool dress the color of morning frost and a coat mended in places no one should have had to mend alone. Her breath fogged in the chill, curling upward like a question with no answer. She waited. Around her, men with calloused hands greeted brides young enough to be their daughters, laughing, lifting trunks, some tossing bundles of flowers. There was warmth in those reunions, awkward smiles, flirtation sewn into tight nerves. But Eleanor stood alone. Her intended, Jed Harlan, was nowhere to be seen. She didn't panic. Not yet. Instead, she stepped off the platform and stood tall in the open street, eyes combing through the town as if daring it to see her as anything less than whole. Storefronts squinted against the cold. The saloon's piano leaked a ragged tune through warped wood. A dusty sign swung violently on a bent nail, Stillwater Mercantile. Then she saw him. Jed. Leaning on a fence post with two other ranchers, laughing about something that wasn't funny. Her heart skipped, not out of fondness, but because something in his face, the lean back of his shoulders, the curl of his lip, said he'd already made a decision. Jed straightened when she approached. His eyes, cold and sun-wrinkled, gave her a once-over. Not a look of longing but one of appraisal. The kind of look a man gives a horse he might return. You're Eleanor? He said. No welcome. No warmth. Yes, Eleanor Walker. She tried to smile though it felt brittle. He took off his hat, scratched the back of his head and gave a half-laugh, half-sigh. You didn't say you were older. I said I was 42. She folded her hands calmly over her bag. Jed chuckled, glancing at his companions who didn't bother hiding their amusement. I figured that meant you still had time for children. Guess I read too kindly. Something burned behind Eleanor's eyes, but she blinked it away. I was honest in my letters. Honest, sure. But folks leave things out, don't they? Like wrinkles. And gray hairs. You wanted a wife. I came to be one. I wanted a bride, not a spinster with battle scars. His voice wasn't cruel, not directly, but it was dry, dismissive, as though she were no more than a misdelivered parcel. Eleanor straightened. Then I'll not waste your time further. Hell, you already have. The three men turned away, laughing as they went. She stood there while the wind pulled her skirt sideways and the townsfolk tried not to look at her too long. Someone muttered something about damn shame and poor woman, but she didn't hear the rest. She didn't cry. She took one step forward. Then another. The train screamed as it pulled away behind her. There was nowhere to go. Stillwater wasn't a kind place to strangers, and even less so to those without a man's name behind them. She wandered past buildings lined with wood as weathered as her coat, past women who turned their backs and men who looked twice, for the wrong reasons. Her boots crunched the frozen road as she passed the blacksmith, the telegraph office, the general store. Nobody offered a word. The sun had already begun to retreat, tucking itself beneath a horizon dusted in snow. She pressed forward, fingers stiffening against the cold. Her suitcase felt heavier with each step. The weight wasn't just leather and cloth. It was everything she had left to carry. She stopped in front of the saloon. A fire crackled inside. Laughter. Cards slapping down. The smell of whiskey. She swayed. And then the world tilted sideways. Her knees gave first. Then her hand lost grip of the suitcase. The sound it made when it hit the snow was small, insignificant. Like a life dropped at someone else's feet. Darkness pinched the edge of her vision. The cold kissed her cheek too long, too close. Her body gave up before her pride did. And that's when she heard him. Ma'am? It was a quiet voice. Not young, not old. But strong. Boots crunched beside her. A hand, warm, calloused, steady, gently tilted her upright. She opened her eyes to a man with dark hair shot through with silver, skin weathered by sun and wind, and eyes like turned soil after rain, quiet, rich, deep. He didn't smile. He didn't gawk. He simply knelt and asked again, "Can you stand?" "I can manage," she whispered, trying to gather herself. "You don't need to," he replied, offering an arm. Not alone anyway. Eleanor didn't take it at first. She was too proud for that. But pride doesn't keep out frostbite, and eventually her fingers curled around his coat sleeve. He helped her to her feet as if she were not heavy, not broken, not humiliated, but simply human. What's your name? She asked, her voice ragged. Samuel. Samuel Blackhorse. He picked up her bag. And without waiting for permission, he walked with her toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to snow-draped prairie and a single horse waited, reins tied to a post. You don't have to, she began. Most things worth doing, he said, you don't have to do. You choose to. The wind howled. But beside Samuel, for the first time in days, Eleanor did not feel small. As they reached the edge of still water, she looked back once, just once, at the town that had taken nothing and offered less. Then she faced forward, toward whatever came next. The land beyond Stillwater unfolded in silence, white plains broken by brittle fences and the black skeletons of trees. Snow whispered across the dirt path as Samuel led his horse, Eleanor beside him, her steps careful, each breath rising like steam from a kettle too long on the fire. They did not speak for some time. Samuel was not a man who filled air with unnecessary words. He moved like someone accustomed to quiet, the kind that came not from loneliness but from choice. Eleanor felt the weight of his silences and didn't mind them. She had no more energy left for pretending cheer, no more strength for small talk. Her legs ached, her pride more so. They reached a cabin near the edge of a frozen creek, modest in build, roof sloped and patched with tar cloth. Smoke curled from the chimney. A chicken darted beneath the porch, squawking with a rusted indignation. A broken wagon wheel leaned beside the door, half covered in snow. Samuel untied the horse, patted its flank, and opened the door without ceremony. Heat spilled out, wood smoke and stew and something earthy. Eleanor hesitated on the threshold, the warmth both a comfort and a warning. You gonna stand in the cold until your pride melts? He asked. She stepped in. The cabin's interior was worn but tidy. A small table, 2 chairs. A pair of boots by the hearth. A cast-iron stove humming low. A braided rug that had seen better winters. It felt lived in not just by a man but by memory. I don't mean to impose, she said as she set her bag down. You didn't, he replied. You fell. There was no teasing in his tone. No pity either. Just plain truth. He handed her a cup of something warm, tea though faint in flavor, and nodded toward the chair nearest the fire. She took it. Your husband in Stillwater? He asked, voice quiet. I'm not married. A pause, filled only by the hiss of steam. Jed Harlan, she said like the words tasted bad. He sent for me. Then decided I wasn't what he wanted. Too old. Not worth the bother. Samuel's mouth twitched, almost like a smile, but not quite. Too old, he echoed as though turning the phrase over in his mouth. Worlds filled with fools saying what's too much, or too little. Don't mean they're right. His tone was gentle, but his gaze carried weight. She tilted her chin. And what would you say I am, Mr. Blackhorse? He didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, he reached for a small box on the mantel and opened it with care. Inside were letters, dozens maybe more, worn at the edges, tied in faded ribbon. Eleanor's breath hitched. Your wife. She was. He nodded once. 14 winters ago. Her name was Mara. She died birthing our son. He followed her 2 days later. The quiet returned, deeper this time. Eleanor looked at the fire, her throat tight. I'm sorry. Samuel set the box down, closed it gently. I don't tell you that for sympathy. Just so you know, grief don't scare me. And silence ain't something I mind. She met his gaze, and for the first time since stepping off the train, something within her eased. The next morning, snow had softened but not stopped. Eleanor awoke to the scent of baking bread, coarse, unsalted, but warm. She helped with chores despite Samuel insisting she rest. She mucked out the chicken coop, her boots sinking in frozen mud, and fixed a latch on the barn door with a hairpin and a shoelace. Samuel watched her, brow raised. You fix everything with bits and stubbornness? She gave a small smile. You'd be surprised what a war nurse learns. That evening they shared stew thick with beans and silence. Samuel whittled a piece of wood at the table, shaping it without hurry. Eleanor cleaned her coat seams, her fingers nimble. Their companionship was not fast nor forced. It built like a fire lit in wet wood, reluctant but warm once it took. One morning, while fetching water from the creek, Eleanor noticed a pile of papers tucked beneath a broken crate in the shed. Her fingers brushed over them before she realized they were more letters. Unmailed, addressed to Mara. She meant to leave them untouched. But a name on one stopped her. Her own. Eleanor froze. She looked over her shoulder, half expecting Samuel to be watching. He wasn't. She slid one letter out. It was dated 3 months ago. Short. Thoughtful. Read. I saw a woman in the Post-Ledger again today, Eleanor Walker. Widow. 42. Claims no beauty. Seeks a husband of any character. I didn't write her. Don't reckon I will. But the world should have more women like her, Mara. Brave enough to ask. Strong enough to mean it. Eleanor's eyes stung. She tucked the letter back. When Samuel returned from the field that afternoon, she stood waiting. You read them? He asked without accusation. She nodded. One. He didn't seem angry. Just tired. Why didn't you send it? He looked down at his hands. Didn't think I had anything to offer. Her voice was soft. You have a home. Brett. Warmth. And hands that don't shake. That's all? It's more than I had yesterday. They stood there, two people made of broken things, bound by a silence that didn't feel so empty anymore. Later that week, Eleanor went into Stillwater with Samuel for supplies. The town was no kinder than before. Eyes followed her, lips curled in whispers, but Samuel's presence drew a cautious respect. They stepped into the mercantile. She gathered flour, soap, coffee beans. He paid with calloused fingers and exact change. As they left, a voice rang out from the saloon. Well, I'll be damned. Jed Harlan leaned on the doorframe, drink in hand, eyes shining with cruelty. If it ain't the old maid in her, what is he now? Guardian angel? Eleanor tensed. Samuel said nothing. Jed stepped closer. You couldn't find a man, so you let the half-breed rescue you? Or is this charity work, Ellie? The world went quiet. Eleanor stepped forward, chin high. You'll speak to me with respect, or you won't speak at all. Jed smirked. You don't give orders here. Samuel's voice came low and firm. She does when she's beside me. Jed laughed. You planning to keep her, then? That your new charity case? I don't keep people, Samuel said. But I stand with them. Jed's smirk faded. Eleanor turned, walked away without looking back. That night, she found herself staring at the fire again, her thoughts brittle. I don't need protection, she whispered. I know, Samuel replied. But it's a gift, not a chain. She turned to him, really looked. I don't want a man to carry me, she said. I want someone to walk beside me, even if it's into fire. Samuel's answer was quiet, but it stayed in her bones. Then stay, he said. There's plenty of fire ahead. She didn't say yes. She didn't need to. The next morning she woke to chickens clucking madly outside. One had gotten loose, feathers flailing across the field. Eleanor ran after it in a linen nightgown and boots, her laughter loud, her arms flapping like a child's. Samuel watched from the porch, biting back a grin. For a moment, just a moment, it was spring again. Not in the air, but in their bones. And when she returned, chicken in hand, cheeks red, Eleanor caught him staring. What? She asked, breathless. He shook his head. Didn't expect the fire in you, he said. She smirked. Then you haven't seen anything yet. The cold wind came again that night. But inside the cabin the fire burned steady. And two hearts, once emptied by loss, now carried more than they'd ever dared to hope. The days passed like beads on a string, uneven, some bright, some worn, but all connected by the quiet rhythm of a life slowly taking shape. Snow began to melt in patches, revealing tufts of frozen earth beneath. Ice loosened its grip on the creek. The trees, once skeletal, hinted at life beneath their bark. And Eleanor found herself moving through it all with a strange new steadiness, as if her steps had weight again. She rose before dawn most mornings now, kindling the stove, setting water to boil, tying her hair back with a ribbon that had frayed at the edges. Samuel never said much about it, but she saw the way he noticed, his eyes lingering on her as she moved about the cabin, as if memorizing the small details he hadn't let himself believe he could care for again. One morning, while chopping kindling outside, Eleanor paused to stretch her back. The axe in her hand was too large, the wood too stubborn, but she kept at it. Samuel watched from the porch, arms crossed. You could have asked me, he said. I could have, she replied, raising the axe again. But you already do enough. His chuckle was low and warm. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. She split another log with a satisfying crack. Then you need to meet more women. That night, as they shared supper, salted pork, cornbread, and boiled greens, Samuel pulled a folded sheet of paper from his coat. He slid it across the table without a word. Eleanor read the letter slowly, recognizing the seal. It was from the Stillwater Land Committee, an invitation to a town gathering meant to settle disputes over farmland fencing and river access. She looked up, brow raised. You planning on going? I have to, he said. Some men don't like how I don't fence my land, or how I don't give a damn about their cattle wandering through. They're itching to push me out. Will they try something? They've been trying for years. But with the thaw coming, they'll want to expand. And men like Jed Harlan don't believe in sharing. Eleanor folded the paper. Then I'll go with you. His eyes met hers, surprised but not displeased. You don't need to. I know, she said, voice firm. That's why I will. At the meeting, held in the back of the mercantile under the dim flicker of lanterns, Eleanor sat beside Samuel as men filled the room with the scent of sweat, tobacco, and suspicion. Jed Harlan stood near the front, arms crossed, lips curled like a man waiting for a fight he thought he'd already won. We've got rights to that water, Jed barked. Ain't fair one man hogs it for his chickens and damn squash. Samuel's voice was steady. I don't hog anything. The creek's been running through that patch since before fences, before names like Harlan mattered. Jed laughed. You saying you were here first? Samuel's face didn't change. I'm saying I ain't the one drawing new lines in the dirt just because I can. The room shifted. Some men murmured, others nodded, most waited to see which way the wind would turn. Then Eleanor stood. Every eye landed on her. I came to this town with a name in my pocket and hope in my hands, she said, voice unwavering. And I was turned away for being too old, too plain, too something. But I stayed. Because I met a man who didn't measure people by how they could serve him, but how they treated what they had. A silence fell heavy. Samuel Blackhorse doesn't need to justify his claim to this land. The land already knows him. And some of you do too, you just forgot what decency looks like. No one spoke. But they listened. Later, as they rode back in the wagon under a sky full of stars, Samuel said nothing for a long while. Finally he glanced sideways. You have a gift, he said. For what? For making people remember themselves. She shook her head, smiling faintly. I just speak when it matters. That's a rare thing, he said. Knowing when it matters. The next week brought trouble in quieter ways. Fence posts were pulled out at night. A scarecrow was set ablaze and left near the edge of Samuel's field. The chicken coop door was unlatched and 2 hens were never seen again. Eleanor found herself walking the perimeter every morning, shotgun in hand, eyes sharp. She wasn't afraid, but she was ready. One morning she returned to the porch with her boots muddy and her shoulders tight. Samuel was waiting. You think they'll come back? She asked. I think men like Jed don't like being embarrassed in front of a crowd, he said. Especially not by a woman. Eleanor smirked. Then he better learn to live with it. But the tension kept building. One afternoon as Eleanor walked to the barn she heard hoofbeats, fast, too fast. She turned as a rider crested the hill, breath misting, hat low. It was a young boy from a nearby homestead, barely more than a child, shouting. Fire, he cried. The miller's place. Barn caught, winds carrying it toward the house. Eleanor didn't think. She ran. Samuel shouted after her, grabbed the water barrels, the shovels. They rode out together, the cold cutting their faces, horses pounding against the hard ground. When they arrived, the barn was already gone, flames snapping at the house's wooden siding. The millers stood helpless, buckets too small, hands blistered. The wind turned the smoke into a wall. Eleanor didn't wait for instructions. She tore her coat off and rushed into the haze, covering her mouth with a soaked rag. Inside, a child cried from the loft. The ladder had burned halfway through. Samuel appeared beside her, eyes wild. I'll hold it, he said. She didn't argue. As he braced the failing wood, Eleanor climbed. The loft groaned beneath her weight. The smoke choked her lungs. She found the child, curled, screaming, no more than 4, and wrapped him in her arms. One step at a time. The ladder creaked. Snapped. Samuel caught her before she hit the ground, rolling with her in the snow, the child safe between them. People rushed forward. Buckets came faster. The fire was finally beaten back. Later, covered in soot and silence, Eleanor sat on the back of the wagon, cradling her sore wrist. You should have let me go, Samuel said, voice low. And missed the chance to prove myself? You already did. She looked at him. To them? To me. In the following days, the town's demeanor shifted. People nodded when she passed. They asked after her. Some brought bread. Others brought stories. Stillwater had seen many women come and go, but few had stayed, and even fewer had stood so firmly without permission. Eleanor began to wonder if, somehow, this place, harsh, unwelcome, raw, had always been waiting for someone like her. One night, as the fire burned low and wind tapped the window like a whisper, she found Samuel at the table, carving something from wood. She sat beside him. "What is it?" He turned it slowly in his hands. A bird, wings stretched mid-flight, delicate despite its rough grain. "For you," he said. She touched it gently. "It's beautiful. I wanted to make something that wouldn't burn," he said. She blinked, suddenly breathless. "I came here with nothing," she whispered. "No dowry. No promises. Just letters and old hands." He took her hand in his. "Every step you took, you earned." They sat in silence then, not the kind that separates but the kind that joins. Outside, the snow began again, soft, slow like a benediction. And inside, Eleanor knew, she wasn't waiting anymore. She had arrived. The wind changed. It came in sharper, colder, an edge not made of snow but intent. Eleanor felt it first while fetching water, the hairs on her neck rising like bristle. The chickens were restless that morning, and the dog barked at nothing with a rawness that unsettled the silence. When Samuel returned from checking the far pasture, he found her waiting on the porch with her arms crossed and her jaw set. "They're coming," she said without looking up. He didn't ask how she knew. Instead, he set the rifle by the door, checked the shells he'd reloaded the night before, and fed the fire till the cabin pulsed with heat. The sun never quite broke through the clouds that day. It hovered behind them like a secret, and the land stretched out beneath it, mute, waiting. Just before noon, a rider appeared at the edge of the horizon, then 2, then 4 more. 7 in total, with Jed Harlan at the center like a thorn wearing a crown. They didn't wear masks. They didn't need to. Samuel watched from the porch, shotgun slung over one shoulder, calm in every line of his frame. Eleanor stood beside him, hair tucked beneath a scarf, rifle in hand. Her heart pounded, not with fear but clarity. She had no illusions left. No borrowed pride. Everything she stood for was now hers. The men slowed their horses as they reached the fence, hooves kicking up cold mud. Jed dismounted first. His coat was clean, his belt heavy with a revolver that gleamed like a lie in the daylight. "You had your chance to leave quiet," he called out. "Now we'll do it loud." Samuel didn't move. "You don't want this." Jed smiled, wolfish. "You think folks in town care? They won't raise a finger. They'll thank us even." His hand hovered near his hip. Eleanor stepped forward, rifle raised, breath steady. Jed squinted. "You got her holding your gun now, too? That's a joke." "She's not holding it for me," Samuel said. "She's holding it for herself." Jed's smirk faded. "Last warning," Samuel called. "Turn back." Another man rode forward, impatient. "He don't scare easy." Samuel didn't reply. Instead, he raised his shotgun, not wildly, but with the calm precision of a man who'd weighed his choices long ago. Then everything broke. The first shot cracked through the stillness like a whip. Smoke surged from the barrel of Jed's revolver. It missed. Samuel fired back, hitting the ground near the lead rider's horse. The animal screamed, bucked, sent its rider sprawling. Eleanor dropped to one knee, sighted the next man who reached for his gun and fired once. He yelped, clutching his leg. Another tried to rush the porch, but Samuel was already there, intercepting with the butt of the shotgun. The man folded to the ground. Jed ducked behind a fence post, fury warping his face. "You think this ends with bullets?" he screamed. "You think this makes you safe?" Eleanor stood tall in the open now, rifle still warm in her hands. "This doesn't make us safe. It makes us heard." Jed stood, raised his gun again. But he never fired. A shotgun cracked from the distant trees, another voice joining the fray. Then another. Townsfolk emerged from behind hills and fences, rifles ready, faces grim. Men and women Eleanor barely knew. The storekeeper's son. The blacksmith. Even Mayor Cortland, puffing up the path on a mule with a rifle too large for his age. Jed froze. "We're done letting you poison this land," the mayor said. "You want war, take it elsewhere." One by one Jed's riders dropped their guns. Jed himself took a full minute, his hands trembling with the weight of a world that no longer bent to him. Then he, too, let the revolver slip into the mud. By sunset they were gone. The townspeople lingered just long enough to help repair a section of fence, nod toward Samuel and Eleanor, and melt back into the dusk. No fanfare. No parade. Just the quiet respect of people who'd finally seen what strength looked like, and wanted to be near it. Eleanor leaned against the porch post, her arms sore, her hands raw from the grip of the rifle. Samuel stood beside her, looking out over the land they defended. I didn't expect them to come, she said. He nodded once. But you were ready. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. It doesn't feel like a win. Not yet. It will. They stood in silence a while longer, until the stars appeared like freckles on the face of the dark. That night, she found herself by the fire again, blanket over her shoulders, tea in hand. Samuel moved about the cabin, unhurried, content. She watched him. You always walk like that, she murmured. Like what? Like the earth doesn't owe you anything. He chuckled, sat beside her. It doesn't. Eleanor turned to face him fully. Why did you open your door that day? Why not let me freeze outside the saloon like everyone else did? He didn't hesitate. Because you stood. She blinked. I fell. You stood before that, he said. On the train platform. In the snow. When they laughed at you. She looked away, throat tight. And you stood again when Jed came, he continued. Even when your knees shook. Even when it would have been easier to hide. You've stood more times than most men I've known. The fire snapped between them. You deserve more than survival, he added. You deserve to be chosen. She set down her tea. Then choose me, she said. He didn't answer right away. He reached into his coat instead and pulled something from his pocket. A small carved bird, the second one he'd whittled. He placed it in her hands. Then he knelt on one knee. I can't promise you riches or ease, he said. I can't promise the world won't try to take more from us. But I can promise this, every day I wake I'll see you. Every night I sleep, I'll thank the stars for the fire you brought into my silence. She didn't cry. But something inside her broke open, like spring thawing the last ice. I don't want a promise of peace, she whispered. I want a vow to fight beside me. Then that's the vow I give. She reached down and took his hand. Later, much later, she would write about that day in a letter to a friend who'd never dared to leave the city. She would say the West wasn't a place, it was a fire. And some women are made of smoke and ash, but others are the spark that burns through the cold. Eleanor had been the one left behind. Now she was the one standing in the doorway of her own life, firelight on her face, and a vow etched into the hands of the man who had seen her not as too old, but as the answer to a silence he never knew how to fill. The land was still harsh. The night still cold. But now, there was warmth that didn't fade. And every step forward was not just earned. It was shared.